And almost every one of those years, the rate of increase has been, or budget cycle has been extraordinary. So my friends on the other side of the aisle, and Michael summarized it very, very well, basically say, we want to raise taxes because we've got to get back to the spending the way it was. Now that's one viewpoint, but I would suggest to you that it's disconnected from the reality of what everybody else is experiencing. I would also suggest to you that raising taxes, particularly the kind that they have proposed, is really counterproductive in terms of what we should be doing in the middle of the deepest recession since World War II. So even Barack Obama, President Obama, has said he's going to postpone his proposals to raise taxes because he thinks, he and his economic advisors, it's a bad idea to be raising taxes in the middle of a recession. So they've essentially said, we're going to postpone our proposals until on into 2011 or so, because we don't think it's a good idea to be raising taxes in a recession. Now, I don't want to give my friends on the other side of the aisle advice, political advice, but you know, if the president is saying don't raise taxes, at least for now, I would hope our Minnesota colleagues on the other side of the aisle would take that same perspective and back off their requests to raise taxes. And they've unveiled their proposals, and what the leaders of their committees have said is they're going to raise taxes by several $1 billion, most likely on the income tax and most likely on the top bracket. Minnesota has 3 tax brackets on income. We have a low, a middle, and a top tier. The top tier kicks in at about $65,000 or $75,000 of income for an individual. Doesn't kick in at $1 million or $500,000 or $250,000, at about $65,000 or $75,000 of income. And in order to get the kind of money that they're talking about by raising the top income tax rate, you'd have to take it up from its current level of 7.85% all the way up to about 11 or 12%. We already have one of the highest income tax brackets in the country, and this would be, I think, the highest except for the super bracket that they put on in California a few years ago. So we'd have the highest income tax in the country at a time when Minnesota needs to be more competitive. Now you might say, well, what's the consequence of all that? Well, one consequence of that is the last thing I think people need, particularly folks who are productive in the economy, is government sending them a bigger bill when they're struggling already to make ends meet. But also importantly, if you raise the individual income taxes in Minnesota, you're also raising the taxes on almost every small and medium-sized business in the state because they are organized as pass-through entities. They pay their tax, business tax proceeds on their individual income tax returns and individual income tax rates. So they're organized as sole proprietorships or partnerships or subchapter S corporations or LLCs. And if you're the owner of a company that's organized like that, you bring forward your business proceeds onto your individual returns and pay at individual income tax rates. So they are proposing a tax on almost all of the small and medium-sized businesses in the state, in a state that is already not competitive enough when it comes to business and job growth. So I want to just suggest to you that is not a wise course of action. I'm going to, with the help of Mike and Claire, fight those kinds of initiatives because I think they are the wrong direction for Minnesota. Now, people say, well, what's the big deal? The big deal is this is not because we want to just be, kind to business for the sake of being kind to business. We want businesses to start and stay and grow here because it's about having this be the kind of city and county and state where we can provide and grow jobs. The #1 quality of life ticket or pathway for most of our citizens is an access to a job, hopefully a good paying job. It's what stabilizes them, it's what stabilizes their family, it's what stabilizes community, it's ultimately what stabilizes and pays for government. So the question, the strategic question we should be asking and answering in this state is what are those things that we can do to increase the likelihood that people will want to start businesses here, grow businesses here, build buildings here, add employees here, conduct research here, commercialize the results of that research here, buy equipment here, and the like. And there's a lot that goes into this, but the point is, I'll be very blunt with you here this morning, Minnesota is not competitive enough when it comes to job growth and business expansion. We've got way too many businesses and in too many business sectors saying, It is not wise, it is not competitive for me to have that kind of job growth and expansion here. And when you get that kind of signal in the marketplace, that is a warning sign for future trouble for all of these reasons. So Minnesota needs to be more competitive. So what should we do about that? Well, in our budget, even though we've got challenging economic times, we've said, and Mike referenced this, we have the third highest business tax rate in the world in Minnesota. It's 9.8%. 9.8%. So I propose to cut that in half over 5 or 6 years so the impact on the state's budget isn't too disruptive in any one year. We've also said let's give businesses an upfront exemption from the state sales tax for the purchases of capital equipment, equipment that would make their employees or their businesses more modern, more productive, more efficient, more automated, and the like. So if you buy that kind of equipment, you'd be exempt upfront from the Minnesota sales tax. We also said if you buy that kind of equipment, and again in our budget proposal, let's allow people to depreciate, not instead of depreciate it over a long period of time, let's allow them to expense it all at once in year one. In other words, a write-off up front all in year one. We also have said we know that there's going to be a huge economic opportunity globally, nationally, and in Minnesota if we can get our share and more of the developing part of the economy around renewable, clean, next-generation energy related businesses. So we've created a whole series of tax incentives and proposals around green and clean energy jobs. We've also said we know that the economy is going to depend on entrepreneurs and micro stage and early stage and entrepreneurial stage and angel investor stage businesses starting here. So we've created proposals for a series of tax credits for people in Minnesota who are willing to invest in those kinds of business startups. And we've also said we recognize that unlike other states, we don't have a capital gains credit or preferential treatment for capital gains in Minnesota. It puts us at a competitive disadvantage. So we've called for 50% capital gains tax break, tax credit for folks who are willing to invest in new businesses, qualifying new investments in Minnesota, if they're willing to hold the investment for a period of time. And the list goes on and on and on. There's dozens and dozens of good ideas about how to make Minnesota a more job-friendly, business-friendly state. And those ideas plus others, we need to make progress each year. The world is getting more competitive. The nation is getting more competitive, and Minnesota needs to be on a path of continuous improvement towards being more and more competitive for the deployment of capital, the growth of jobs, the starting of business, the building of buildings, the adding of equipment, the conducting of research, and the like. If you add up, you rank order all of the job growth in this country from 2003 until the economic collapse of last fall, and you put the states from #1 in job growth to last place, and you array them by the amount of job growth, you will see that every state above Minnesota, with a very few exceptions, in job growth spends less on government, not more. Not more. And the only ones above us that are an exception to that rule are the aberrational ones like Alaska and New York and Hawaii, and they have some unique challenges in geography and economies of scale. So the correlation in the last decade, as Mike referenced, is between places that are more competitive from a cost standpoint and job growth, not the inverse. And we've got the data to back this up. So Minnesota, the good news is we've made some very good progress the last 6 years. But at the same time, a lot of other states have made even more progress. We led the nation in upper Midwest Great Lakes states in job growth from 2003 to 2008 with one exception. Now you might say, well, that sounds pretty good, Governor. The problem is the job growth has not been taking place in the Great Lakes states in the upper Midwest and the Northeast. It's been taking place in the South and the West. That is not an accident. People are making rational decisions about where to deploy capital, where to spend money, where to build buildings, where to expand, where to add employees and the like. One very visible example is the auto industry. Again, until the collapse of last year, there were more cars being made in the United States of America than ever before in gross volume. The only thing is that we're being made in Michigan. That is not an accident. And then people say, well, Minnesota has characteristics like Michigan. Setting aside the challenges, economic challenges in Detroit, Michigan has a big, really wonderful university system. They have a tradition of really good public schools. They got a tradition of hardworking Midwestern folks who work hard and show up and the like. They had a tradition of big public investment in infrastructure and the like. But the marketplace was saying it costs too much to do business in Michigan.